Good morning.
Morning.
Good to see a nice crowd here. One more thing you need to add there is you need some more keynote speakers. No, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. I kicked it off 2 years ago with a talk in Bangalore. But more than that, I think it's a subject that's close to my heart. I'm passionate about it. Some of you know me from work experience or otherwise. I've been a product manager long before there was a term called product manager. I was even aware there was a term called product manager. And so it's to me, I always think about it, put the customer in the middle and then think about, yourself as a customer and say, do you like what you're seeing? And then be curious about it. So I think what I want to talk about today is, product strategy is a very fancy term, but if you look at the dictionary definition of what strategy, it's really a set of plans that you put together, a stratagem for obtaining a specific goal or result. Right? I mean, that's the obviously dictionary definition. You overlay product on top of it. And this is really, the original definition was about military tactics. How do you go back? And to me, a strategy without execution is pretty much useless. Right? And so when you talk about strategy, it's really about achieving a goal, and part of achieving the goal is also about execution. So what I want to talk about today is a set of things, the way I think about it. This is not a theory exercise. This is not a textbook definition of how strategy works. This is my practical definition of how strategy works. This is how I use it. Teams that work with me know how I think about this. And it really, to me, it always starts with a set of questions. It's a way of taking a step back and saying, so jumping in and starting to, the first reaction of a lot of people is go to the solution. Right? I mean, you start teaching this even as kids. You're at least when I sit down with my kids and I try to work through a math problem. You stop trying to solve the problem before you start really understand all the questions. And so to me, this starts with a set of questions that you start asking. And this can be, I have 5 questions here, it can be 10 questions, it can be 3 questions. Depends on your personal style. But at the end of the day, this is what you want to have answered. What is the market opportunity? Is there really an opportunity, or are you trying to, are you barking up the wrong tree? Who is the customer? And to me, that's a super critical definition of who the customer is, because everything else gets defined around it. The third thing would be, what is the solution that addresses a customer's need? And that's why the customer is important, because there has to be a need that you're trying to satisfy. Unless, of course, you feel, you have the Steve Jobs model of, let me tell you what you want to know. But even in Steve Jobs model, it's really built on the shoulders of other failures that have happened in the market with respect to the customer. Then the fourth one is, of course, what defines success? Do you have a good understanding of what success is? And how do you measure that in the context of what you're trying to do? And then last but not least would be how do you affect customer adoption of a solution that you come out with? So I think to me, these 5 questions, when I sit down and I start looking at a problem or I'm trying to understand some particular situation, these questions always help me in understanding what is the crux of what you're trying to do. So I want to drill down a little bit on each of these. Market opportunity, it's a big word, and you can overlay space here as well nowadays, given that a lot of people are trying to get to privatizing space travel. But really it's about, what is the opportunity that you're going on? And the way you get there, and again here, it starts with a set of things you look at. One is clearly defining what the market that you want to play. I sit down with a lot of people and I spend time with also people who are, either big companies or bigger companies that I work for. Small companies are trying to understand the same problem. Is people just want, don't have a clear idea on what they think is the market that they want to play. And this can be anything. It can be, consumer versus enterprise. It can be small company or a large company. It can be, bottom of the pyramid versus going after the top of the pyramid. It can be, specific market driven. It can be US versus India versus Southeast Asia versus Middle East, whatever it is. Understanding which is the market that you want to play in is super important to start. Right? Second one is, once you know what market you approximately want to play in, putting some constraints on the problem, not to the extent that it becomes so narrow that you're going after, the parents of every international school student in Bangalore who owns an iPhone, who lives in Sarjapur, that level of a definition, to I want to win everything, right? So there is something in terms of understanding, and this is where I think it's important to step back and say, okay, what's the constraints that I want to overlay around the opportunity that I want? I want to go after medium-sized businesses which are in this particular space. Okay, fine. Then at least then you can start bounding and start understanding. Is it a large opportunity, small opportunity? Is it worth going after a niche or not? And a lot of these have ramifications for the opportunity. So arriving at the addressable opportunity is important. What do you want to go after? Is it the next 6 months? Is it next 1 year? Is it next 2 years? More than 3 years, it starts to get very fuzzy. So you really want to be very crisp, narrow it down to what is the addressable opportunity that you have in front of you. Then finally, of course, understanding who else is out there, right? The market analysis. Those of my favorite framework here from a business school perspective is the Porter's framework. It's very, very crisp and clean in terms of just very quickly arriving at who's the players, who are the suppliers, who consume stuff, what's the alternatives coming in, etc. It's a very quick way of laying out a market analysis on terms of what happens, right? What is the opportunity? Is it really good? If there are a lot of players, the red ocean, blue ocean, there's a lot of different terminologies and theses out there. But at the end of the day, it's about figuring out who else is out there. Are they going after the same customers? Are they successful or not? If they're successful, what's actually helping that? Is there a larger opportunity here for not just them, but somebody else to come in as well? So a lot of those kinds of things. So end of the day, arriving at a market opportunity, defining it for yourself is really important. Second, once you've done that, now you understand which market you want to go after. Now you want to understand what's the customer look like. And I think there's some really good talks later on. I see Salil sitting here, and Salil's an expert at this. And he taught me a lot in terms of thinking about these kinds of how do you actually narrow it down to customers as well. One, get a deep view of your customer. And this is not superficial. This is not like, here's an IT admin, I want to go after an enterprise. This is not that, right? This is really getting deep. You get into the shoes of the customer. There are creepy ways to do this, of course. You can go and hang out where customers are and kind of observe them, take photographs, record things. That's one way to do it, but also, being out there and talking to folks, talking to customers, talking to people who supply to these customers, really, building a really deep image, which is the demographic, the psychographic profile, socio-economic, cultural trends, the range of things that go on. But more than anything else, what works for me is I observe, right? Like one of the observations I have, and I'd be happy to hear somebody's opinion on this. I happen to see, this is maybe just me, but I happen to see a lot of people who are walking and talking on their mobile phones seem to be women, and I'm not sure why. But I've asked my daughter this question, and I'm not able to get a good answer. So if somebody has an answer, you can tell me. But my only point there is not that I'm watching all the women on the road, but it's just that happens that I happen to notice it. But that's an observation, right? I don't know if there's an observation. I don't know if there's any result of that observation, but it's one thing. Wherever you are, I think it's worth as if you're a product manager, not even product manager. The message is actually a broader set of messages to people who work in the product domain particularly. This could be engineers, it could be product managers, it could be user experience designers, whoever you want. Keep your eyes open and watch. Because you never know what observations can lead to other important decisions that you may need. Right? So, what does that lead to? The observation, you can record all these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you need to create an image of that customer for yourself, or personas. Personas are really powerful. It becomes, in my mind, the lingua franca in which you actually refer to your customers. When somebody says, let's say, my daughter's name is Aditi, so I'll use that. We're actually building this thing for Aditi. Everybody knows that, everybody in your team or people you work with need to understand that you're now dealing with a teenager who's studying in a college, who has all these kinds of friends, lives in Bangalore, lives in a top-tier town. Here are the aspirations, here's what they're interested in. So this is one way of actually creating the persona that all of you can communicate around. It can be very clear that the solution that you're going to build is based on observations you've made of this persona, which kind of embodies all the different things that you've observed. And being able to actually, discuss around it. So it becomes the touchstone by which you measure all the things that you're trying to do and decisions that you make. Third piece is, once you have the persona, build a view of their life that's material to you. Right? And this could be storyboarding, which is again a very powerful way to do this, where you're actually describing a day in the life of that person. And it's very, you can put it up on the wall, you can use it as a medium of presentation, etc., which clearly defines here's what, things that look like that's material to you, and that actually can then be used to define what is the solution that you're coming up with that maps to that day in life. I mean, we've done some things in the past where, for example, we're looking at young people in India and saying, what do these people want? And let's say it's entertainment. And then, we're a very crisp way of defining that we're going after this age group, this demographic, and by, who lives in this geographic location. Here's their aspirations. They watch movies, they follow movie stars, and so on, right? And then you arrive at a conclusion of, okay, here's what's really important in terms of what we want to do with that for that consumer, or that customer. Fourth, again, you will see this theme through my presentation. Understand what the competitive environment is. What else are they using? What is working? What's not working? I think, you don't have to make the same mistake somebody else did. Like, refer to the Steve Jobs model. If you read the book, his biography, it appears as if, the popular assumption is that Steve just kind of used to dream this up. He did. Maybe he himself consciously never did this, but really, the iPod was based on the failures of the Walkman or the success of the Walkman and what eventually it died, the failures of the other MP3 players and its lack of usability, the ability to connect to a larger store, all these kinds of things. These are observations. You don't have to discover these things from scratch. Learn from what is happening out there. Learn from failures. Failures teach you the most. You don't have to be the case study of the failure either. I know there's a lot of honor in carrying a badge that you actually built startup that never went anywhere. Good, it was a great learning experience. But there are thousands of them out there which have also failed, and how can you learn from this? So observing your competition or things that have happened in the past is a great way for you to learn and not have to repeat the same things and kind of building on it. Right? And last but not least is about creating a hypothesis in the business model. A lot of times I find people say, oh, you know what, I'll figure out the business model later. Sure. You have to test the business model, that things that hypothesis. That's the reason I'm calling it a hypothesis, because it is a hypothesis. You don't know what's going to work, especially for V1 type, completely new products. You can say, it could be advertising driven. Sure, in the consumer space is one way to do it. It could be subscription driven. It could be, there are plenty of business models out there. At least have a hypothesis of what you want to do. You can change it later, but there's nothing set in stone. But at least have a hypothesis on, for this particular type of customer, what could work. If it's an enterprise business, it's a small business, other business models that you can think of. It's a consumer, it's a certain kind of business model. US versus India, it's a different business model. So make sure that you have an understanding of a business model hypothesis as part of your customer definition. Okay, let me segue to, once you have the market opportunity, you define who your customer is. Now, what's the solution that you want to bring to market? And again, I'm not talking just to startups. I'm not just talking to big companies. This is true for everybody. And it's also a question of, is it a incremental? Is it an existing product that you're taking to the next level? Is it a brand new product? It has all these kinds of ramifications. So one, you kind of observe the customer, you come up with a set of needs, pain points that the customer has, etc. Stack that. And sure, this is again your cut based on, this is not just the stack ranking of the needs. It's also based on the fact that you have built, an approximate business model. You've kind of understood the environment they operate in, other businesses that are catering to these people. What's coming up? So stack ranking the business needs. Pick the top ones to focus on. You can't focus on all of them. You've got to be judicious about what ones you pick. So pick the ones that you think are most relevant for the consumer profile that you pick. Second thing, then, this is super important. It doesn't matter. You can't doodle on this sitting in a room, forever. Get it in front of your customers. It could be paper prototypes. It could be basic early hypotheses. It could be tests. Get out there, right? Don't be shy. Get it in front of as many people that you think are relevant to actually test it out. It doesn't have to be a full-baked product. It could be, there are many different ways of doing this. And, again, others are probably better at this than I am. But this is a model that seems to work over and over. So don't just sit on it. Get it out. Third one, develop a value proposition based on it. The reason to get it out there in front of customers is the fact that you can start testing your value proposition. What is actually sticky? What do people really care about? Will they really pay for it? How do you actually craft that value proposition so you have your value proposition coming next? And demonstratively, why they need it produced, right? And critically, because don't fall in love with your solution. That's the worst thing you can do for yourself, right? your baby is always the prettiest, but the problem is that the others cannot think the same way. So just be critical about the judgment in terms of how you build your value proposition. Understand the dependencies. You're not in an island by yourself, right? It's a connected ecosystem. And connection can be within large enterprises, other groups which are solving the same problem. But it's also outside. You don't have to build everything yourself. You can leverage so much out there. A lot of startups obviously are doing that. This whole cloud model, all these other things. But understand whether it works for you or not. Not everything will work for everybody. Just be clear about it, right? There may be business development issues here. You'll have to go cut some deals to make things work. But just be aware of what is the dependencies that are required for your solution and be able to address that up front. And those decisions will go a long way in bearing fruit. Then last but not least, again, is to deliver to customer fast and build to scale. And this is different than getting from customer fast. This is about getting the solution out. Don't build 6-month roadmaps for a V1 product. It doesn't work. Get it out. Go agile. If you're a small team, great, because then you can get it out as quickly as you can. Don't look for perfection. Especially in the current world of hosted applications or mobile applications, etc. Launch. Get it out there. Get your early hypotheses of things that you think are the unmet need. That's why all these earlier steps are critical in arriving at what is the absolutely core of essence of what you're trying to build here and going after. Get it out to the customer and iterate really fast. Because instrumenting for insight and iterate. The reason I say instrument is a lot of people forget about the fact that you have to collect metrics. Taking the time to actually coming up with understanding what you're instrumenting for, and I'll segue into my next topic on this one, is really critical. Build it in from day one. Build in the fact that the ability to collect data. Data is your friend. There's all this, obviously big lot of talk about big data and all these other things. But at the end of the day, data is your friend. And that's the only way, especially in the consumer space, of gaining very rapid insight into what is happening with your product in the market. You can't go out and observe. In an enterprise, it's easier to do. You can have a couple of customers you can launch with and go and hang out there and actually watch them use it. But even there nowadays, it's getting hard, especially with hosted solutions. So you have to be able to instrument and be able to do that, effectively. So that segues into the topic of metrics, right? What are you going to collect? What data are you going to collect? First of all, I think define realistic goals for users and revenue. And this is, I see this constantly people falling into the trap. Again, because of the fact that they feel that their solution is the best in the market and nobody else is going. People are, why aren't they coming? You launch and then you expect everybody to download, a million copies of the app onto their phones, and then to your disappointment, you find that you got 20 downloads, 100 downloads, etc. Right? Not that the solution is bad, but it's just that things take time. Just be realistic about it. I'm not saying don't stretch. If you feel that, that's where I think understanding the market opportunity and defining and addressing the market opportunity becomes really important, because it helps you set realistic goals on what you think is going to be the ramp for your product in terms of usage, in terms of a whole bunch of things. Now, you never know, things may take off, right? All of us would love to have a Gangnam style video that goes out and gets 800 million views on it. It rarely happens, right? So just be realistic about what is. Second thing is validation. Validate a scalable business model. Again, the business model hypotheses that you have created in the beginning, start validating it. Because you will have to make changes as you go. Things that you obviously able to assumptions you make, the realism of what happens. You'll think advertising works, but suddenly you find that advertising may not be the right model for your business. You think subscriptions is the way to go, but sometimes people are not going to do it. Freemium is the other one, right? You don't find enough downloads happening. So what are you going to do? So there's a range of things that you need to understand. That's why it's very important to build the hypotheses of your business model ahead of time, testing it out with customers even before you launch your product, and then constantly revising it and taking a look at it once you launch it. And all of this can only be done if you instrument and actually watching what's going on in your model. So you have a very clear idea on what is going on. In the web space, it's maybe click-throughs, maybe unique users. In the mobile space, it could be also still be click-throughs. The question is how are you going to do that for an app versus the mobile web. There's a large range of things that need to come in. Customer satisfaction. To me, I think this is a really, really critical metric that needs to be measured. This could be anything from feedback that's coming on the app stores of your product to getting out there and actually talking to people who are using your product if you can find them. Customer satisfaction. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people will be willing to live with, at least gaps in your product because they're happy with it, right? With the way your product is, the way. So customer satisfaction is an important metric. People forget that. They watch the hard metrics, they forget the soft metrics. I think the soft metrics are actually equally important in actually watching and being very clear about it. Then again, coming back to my recurring theme of competition, measure against the competition. You may feel that your numbers are growing like crazy, but somebody else's numbers are growing even faster. And if you forget that aspect, the customer satisfaction is the other index, right? Watch, because your competition may be, you may be doing great, you feel you're doing great, but somebody else is doing better than you. So it's important for you to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. So last but not, this is about, you've done all the great work, right? You've got the product, you've got it launched, get it out there. You need to make sure that you're marketing. Now, I'm not going to go to it. Obviously, there are marketing experts and there are people who, focus on this, and that's why it's great to have a great marketing team with you, if you can afford it, or at least a good marketing person you can bring on board. If you're a startup, get somebody in with you who can help you build and craft that marketing plan. Because marketing plan becomes, first of all, defining clear marketing objectives and strategies. It's becoming a very complex world out there, right? In terms of how you address your customers. But there are a lot of, there are really good marketing people who understand how to actually build a great marketing plan and an execution strategy. Second one is availability strategy, right? How do you want to launch? Is it a, go to beta and then slowly open it up? Or go all out there and then, try to drive demand? What's the strategy you want to follow? Well, a lot of people do different things, the creative ways of doing this. But it's something that you need to make a decision on and how you're actually going to go out to market. Driving adoption and usage, again, a very complex world out there, how you drive adoption. What you do on app stores versus, on the web versus, something else. There's a lot of things that need to happen. Social versus local versus mobile versus, there's a range of things that need to happen. Again, having a person who really understands this with you, not everybody can be an expert in everything. It's important to recognize that and actually bring in the right type of support with you. This is clearly not me, right? I'm not a marketing. I understand the nuances of marketing, but I'm not a good marketer. And if I were to do something like this, would bring in somebody who will help me complement my team skills with this type of skill set. Last but not least, again, coming back to my competitive stuff. Remember that there's two guys with a laptop and a cloud infrastructure coming after you, right? If you're a large company, small company, it doesn't matter. Look over your shoulder constantly because things change. People have creative marketing strategies, how do you? Again, it comes back to customer satisfaction. Right? The next, especially in the consumer world today, those of you who have smartphones and download apps, it's like, okay, the next thing coming down the pipe maybe looks better than the last one that I downloaded. And that's all of our story right there, right? There's somebody following you constantly, coming after you. So part of your marketing strategy also needs to be how you're going to mitigate that. And be able to stay in front, the differentiation you want to bring in front of your customers. Finally, this is not a set in stone, like I said. Iterate. Every single stage you're iterating. You're constantly reevaluating and doing this. It's a very tough thing to do, especially when you have products in the middle of development cycles. You can't keep iterating. But that's why you cannot sit on a product for a long time. You've got to get it out there. So build for Agile. Agile as a methodology is one thing, but then Agile as a philosophy is a different thing. And to me, it's more about how you're comfortable in actually getting it out. If you're a 2-person shop versus a 500-person team, the methodologies and processes may be different, but at the end of the day, the message is the same. Don't sit on it. Get it out there, iterate, constantly watch, evaluate, adjust. Iteration is a key component of the strategy itself that you need to do. When I started my, 10 years ago when I was at Microsoft, we had 3-year development cycles. Sure. A lot of you who work in enterprise companies are familiar with that. But even enterprises are no longer bound by that. We had the advantage of getting a product out, going to a waterfall model, have milestone driven, do all these things. We had a 3-year cycle to work with. That's not true anymore. You have a 6-week cycle to work with, maximum. It doesn't matter if you're a small company or a large enterprise. That's the way you need to operate. All right, that's all I had. I'm happy to take questions if you like. Good.
Let's say you are developing a product, right, and internet premium model. Okay. First of all, there are two things. If your adoption is not going as you have envisioned, how do you determine whether the business model or the value proposition is wrong, or you just need to do better marketing? And second, if the free to premium conversion is not happening, it's the same question as you need to relook at the product what you're offering, or do you need to do better marketing? How do you determine your product as what you have developed is a failing model, it's not going to work, and go into a different model?
Yeah, I think the question was, if you didn't hear it on the other side, was, let's say you have a freemium business model that you made an initial choice of a freemium business model, you get your product out, and you're noticing that things are not changing, are not moving, your metrics are not moving. Do you change your product? Do you change your business model? Or do you feel that you've got to go do better marketing? I don't know if there's a simple answer to it, because I think this is where all of the other pieces come into play, right? You made some initial assumptions, let's say it's a freemium assumption. I mean, LinkedIn is a good example, right? How many people here have a LinkedIn Pro account? I see one hand, maybe 2, 3. Okay. All right. How many of you have a LinkedIn account? A good example of, does that mean LinkedIn failed in what they did? No. I think somebody asked Deep Nishad this question and asked on product company. Deep Nishad is SVP of product for LinkedIn. How are you going to sell somebody to actually upgrade to Pro? Of course, he brought in the value of Pro and how you can do better networking and job, if you're looking for a job, or if you're in sales, how you do it. I can almost bet, and I don't know, he didn't answer that, obviously it's an internal decision I'm sure they made. Sometimes it's you bake that into that's where you need to be realistic about your books. Maybe you have other models of monetizing your free offering without having to upgrade people, and then you build in a certain component of people who will upgrade. And you really need to understand who's going to upgrade. That's why building your customer profile becomes really important. It's not going to be your entire base, right? It's going to be that small sliver of people. Now you need to really understand what that sliver is going to look like and who that sliver is. So you can really go after them in a big way, right? Now if you feel that sliver in this case, you can speak for LinkedIn, I guess, not going to implement their model. Let's say that sliver happens to be salespeople in the field who really need to connect with prospects, meaningfully, right? And that number may not be more than 5% of your entire base. Now for that 5% base, you need to have really good value proposition, demonstrated value proposition. Because marketing, a lot of it is about showing value, right? And showing that value happens well up front in building all the stages that you come out. So that when you get to the stage of trying to sell the customer, you have the proof points. And then that's going to take time because you have to build the proof. And some of it is case studies, some of it is being made public about some of the success stories, all of these things. So there is not one answer. I don't think you can immediately fall back and say, I have a wrong product. Maybe not. Maybe some assumptions you made. It's better to go back and look at your assumptions you made and validating those. And then adjusting for whichever assumption you feel needs to be tested out. Again, this is the experimental culture needs to be built in. This is where experimentation and data comes to the picture. If you have the ability to do A/B testing, maybe there's one opportunity to do that. So you're really testing that to understand what is working and not working. In many companies, you have hundreds of buckets running at any given time. That's the reason to do it. Because you're looking at the hypothesis testing going on, and then use that as a data to make the decision that you want to do. Because seat of the pant decisions, after some time don't really feel. That's why instrumentation becomes really important, because you're instrumenting to find out what's going on. So that's why I had those other things to do. Good question, man.
That's not the value proposition. So when you're talking about product, so you have a target customer base, but if your customer base is pretty long, so like take an example of LinkedIn, so they are targeting people who want to just bring their profile, people who are in HR, people who are in sales. Okay, so if they keep on building new features to give a right value proposition, don't you think that it kind of becomes an overhead on the product? And your product becomes too large, or iterating the product will become a pain. So do you think to address this kind of market, you can still have one product, or you should actually have different flavors of your product targeting individual segments?
So I think the question was, can you build a one-size-fits-all product that addresses every component of an enterprise, right? If I understand your question, HR or whatever, verticalization of a product. See, I think there are some fundamental decisions here you may need to make at some point. Right? If you find that you have a product, you have a base value proposition that can then be customized very easily for the other verticals. One way of doing that is to become a platform. I mean, Facebook is a good example, or Salesforce, or somebody else. You're building at that point a platform, you're building the underpinnings. You may verticalize it for one or two domains because that's what your core value is. But if you suddenly find that a lot of pieces underneath are valuable for others to do, it's better to let somebody else verticalize on top of it. So you become a platform. So see again, this is where iteration becomes important. As you start to build a product and you start to grow. I am not a big fan of building every single, throwing everything into the kitchen sink. Right? It doesn't work. So at some point you'll have to sit back and say, okay, do I have something here which is valuable across the domains? Can I open it up as a platform, let third parties build on it? Now that means you have to relook at your business model, you look at your customer base, some of those other fundamental decisions you made. But that's one way to look at the problem. Because if you start building, I think the old model used to be that way, right? I mean, you create many of the Microsoft products are a good example. You have an Excel and then suddenly, or a Word, you have 15-20% of the features which are valuable to any one demographic. But nobody ever uses every single feature. You could build a product like that, but I don't think that's the model as we move ahead because that goes against your agility problem. Because you can't be agile when you start doing it. So I think this is again, this is where getting it out there, getting usage going, getting feedback, again re-evaluating the assumptions you've made, periodically adjusting for it. Maybe you've discovered that let's stop doing this and let's start doing this because it's much more valuable for us to do.
So are you saying that having a vertical strategy in the beginning will add more value so that...
Yeah, that's where you pick your customer, right?
Okay, so have more vertical focus, and then if you think you are addressing a problem for a wider audience, then you go horizontal.
Yeah, you've got to start somewhere. You can't start with a wider audience because then you won't get to the, you won't be able to discover what you really want. Last question. Back.
One second.
Yeah, you're right. I can repeat your question.
Okay. So we talked a lot about iterating and launching things faster.
Yep.
So we say that launch beta. Right. We say that launch products in beta, take feedback, iterate, relaunch, so that time to market is faster. But it might work in the desktop or the website or the product of that versions. But what I'm seeing in mobile is that strategy still holds true because what's being told for mobile is that you can't run that model if you are, let's say, a lot of startups are coming up with mobile apps as one of their product. So if you're coming with a mobile-only strategy and you've come up with a substantial, like a substandard product or a minimum viable product, what we say. So does that strategy hold true for mobile also, or that doesn't work? So like, do they need to prepare everything and do a one whole hog launch, or that iterative model works there also?
I think iterative model works there. And the so I want to just nuance what you use two terms I want to nuance. Substandard versus minimum viable product. Okay. Substandard products are bad. Let me tell you that up. Minimum viable does not need to be substandard. All I'm saying is be very crisp about which unmet need you're going to go after in your video. Right? So you need to have something that you take, but you do it really well. Right? And that's why the customer satisfaction measurement becomes really important. Even if the customer, what you want to have the customer do is to come back to you and say, hey, you know what, I would love for you to do this more. Right? I mean, that's the dialogue you want with your customer. Not, you're a substandard product, no one will look at you again. Right? So you don't want substandard, but at the same time, you don't want, so many features in it that the customer's getting lost and they don't value it. And that's why, again, important to understand who your customer is. Important to narrow down your opportunity to a point where you're not just solving everything. It's important there to make sure that you're picking the unmet need that you really need to go after. At least, and then expand, right? You will discover also what is going on. Please do not be substandard. Quality is you need to have a level of quality in your products. And, it's not okay to release a product which has a lot of flaws in it because you will lose that customer. people don't have the appetite, and they have so many options. You have 100,000 apps sitting in an app store. You have one more app. It's very difficult. And even if you're a big brand, you could be the biggest brand in the market. You launch a substandard product. There are two guys in the garage who do better than you. Sorry to nuance your words, but that kind of stuff. And last question.
Thanks. I work as an innovation consultant, and in the Indian geography, I work with a lot of FMCG companies and BFSI companies. What I've realized is the CPG companies are more geography focused, and therefore the concept of design thinking, creating prototypes early and iterating them is easier compared to a technology product because the audience is global. That's what I'm assuming right now, maybe right, maybe wrong. But isn't the challenge of creating prototypes and iteration is a bigger challenge than, let's say, an FMCG company in technology?
So you're saying it's, so if I understand your question right, are you asking if the technology domain, it's harder to do prototyping than in an FMCG company with the geography focus?
Because the audience is global and geographies are bigger.
No, I think that's where, again, like I said right in the beginning, you need to choose your market carefully. It depends on the product. Right? There are some products which may go global, but you can't start off saying that I'm going to be a global product company, especially if you're a small company. Right? For a large company, it's different because you may already have a global footprint, your sales channels, you have all these things built up, you have customer base that you can mine. But for a small company, you've got to be judicious. And creating a prototype of a product, even if it's a technology product, like I said, there are methodologies to do this, whether they're paper prototypes where you walk up to a customer and kind of give them a mock-up of what you're doing. If it's a mobile application, you can build a dummy app, it's like a prototype app on a mobile that you can show somebody. You can get feedback very quickly. So, in fact, I would say the technology domain is sometimes easier to do, and so feel free to jump in. You have a lot of experience on this one. To do this kind of things, then you can do it in. I'm not familiar with FMCG, so I'll stay away from making remarks there. But I can understand the technology domain is very, it's not hard at all to do prototypes. Get your consumer in.
Yeah, okay. In a way, it's easier because you're directly in contact with the consumer, mostly virtually. But the difference is that in FMCG, the context is more physical. You don't interact with the consumer. You show the product physically with them. And you get usage scenarios, usage-based experiential feedbacks, which are easier to influence back into your product. So, but yeah, I got it.
I mean, you can use exactly the same methodology. There's nothing preventing you from doing exactly the same what you're doing for FMCG tactics in the technology domain. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you this souvenir from IPMA. The shape is in the form of a flame. Actually, it's going to ignite the product ecosystem. It's getting ignited. So, thank you for your.